Hello, YouTubers, friends, compatriots, bootlicker shills, desolate search, peasants, vassals, minions, meat sacks. I'm a useful idiot. Welcome. And today I want to talk about the kind of nutty ideas that people believe, and particularly when we live in an era when people are always dismissive of things they call conspiracy theories and things that just seem so outlandish. And the axis of this discussion is the whole idea that it's really hard to have discussions with people when they look around the world and they think everything is normal and everything is what it appears to be and everything is what people say it is. And so they look around and they hear these narratives that are handed out by politicians and the media, and they believe that this is basically the truth and that the world around us is what they say it is. And of course, this isn't true. Everything is fake. Everything is fraud. Everything has an agenda. Everything is moved by power and money. And a good example, looking around the world, people think Russia is an evil empire and that they attacked Ukraine unprovoked and that they want to somehow conquer Europe. They believe that Israel is just the innocent victim of Muslim terrorist zealots. They think that Europe and the United States are in Ukraine to defend democracy and freedom. And then they also hear the politicians always talking about freedom in the Constitution. And yet we have a government and politicians who do everything in their power to curtail free speech freedoms and certainly don't follow the Constitution. But they like to throw it around a lot. And we hear phrases like trust the science when science has an agenda. We just hear all these discussions. And so to have a discussion with another person who believes that basically everything they hear and see out there is more or less true and that the world is what it seems to be and these narratives are what they seem to be. And that makes it very problematic to have discussions with people if they don't if they don't use analysis and they don't use critical thinking. And part of this discussion brings in a topic that's a lot larger than I want to get into in this video, and that's the creation of mass public opinion manipulation by Edward Bernays at the turn of the century before this last century. So in the early 20th century, he was the cousin of Freud, and he used Freud's methodologies and ideas and analysis to realize that you could manipulate people on a massive scale. And of course, at first that was used for commercial purposes, and then he started getting hired by governments to manipulate public opinion. And there's a great video on YouTube about why do we eat bacon and eggs. I recommend it because a very normal thing. Everyone has come to accept the norm that bacon, eggs, toast, and orange juice are the very staples that we should be eating for breakfast. And then people think that is just absolutely normal. But when you get deeper into the story, you find out a lot of commercial and business interests were involved in creating this mythology that the core nutrients and foodstuffs you should be eating for breakfast are bacon, eggs, orange juice, and toast. And so that strikes at the very core of the discussion here, in the fact that a lot of people just really don't have analytical abilities and critical thinking to realize how their opinions and their views of the world are formed. And I assure you that from the day you're born until the day you die, a lot of the opinions and perspectives you have are not your own. They've been drilled into you by very powerful forces that get paid a lot of money and spend a lot of time figuring out how to mold public opinion. But what I want to get into is a really awesome list that Dr. Vernon Coleman came up with. And basically all these ideas of people that look out in the world and think these ideas are normal and the world is actually what it seems. And for me, having done a lot of research and have done a lot of analysis and use a lot of critical thinking, I've found out that what will be done in the name of power and money, and that's what makes the world go round, power and money, and what is done on a daily basis to sustain that power and money is something people just don't want to think about, or they think it's just outrageous. And for example, one of the things that's going on is people are killed and assassinated every day by people who have political and corporate interests and are having their power and their money challenged. And so it's naive to think that that's not happening all the time. And yet people reject that notion and just don't think that such outrageous things happen every day in the world. And they do. But let me get into this list because I find it interesting. So the basic idea is people who look around at the world, they think that the politicians are smart people. They must have been smart to rise to power, and the people in the media are professional journalists and are presenting more or less the truth. And the fact is, all of them have agendas, and they don't really necessarily believe in all the things they say, but it sounds good. It reaches people emotionally, and it creates this idea that basically everything in the world is working the way it's supposed to be, that some of the things that we see that seem outrageous or bad are anomalies. But I would put forth the idea that the foundation of the entire world and the events we see and the people involved in it is fraud, deception, propaganda, and agendas. But let's get into this list. So these are the nutty ideas that people believe in who accept that what they see in the world is normal. Number one is your government cares for you. Number two, the COVID pandemic was real, and that if they hadn't given out the vaccines, lots of people would have died. And number three is lockdowns help save millions of lives from a death worse than life. And of course, as we're seeing now, a lot of the side effects of the vaccines themselves are actually creating more mortality than COVID ever did. Number four, politicians are driven by a desire to do good. And of course, there's a handful that really are, but for the most part, we have these people always talking about freedom and the Constitution and what they want to do for the American people, and they're actually self-serving opportunists and sociopaths and psychopaths who are driven by power and money. Number five, the mainstream media provides an honest, reliable account of things happening in the world. And of course, a lot of people have figured out that that's not necessarily true. But that said, we have a journalist class in the media who are part of the agenda, and they are part of the statist narrative, and people tend to think anything they disagree with is misinformation and the truth and not the truth, and then they think everything they agree with must be true and is not misinformation, but that's natural. Number six, drug companies are staffed by kind, good-hearted people who want to do good and save lives. Number seven, electric cars run on special magical electricity, which is free and comes out of wires hidden in the ground. And of course, a lot of people just don't know that it takes a lot of nuclear power, it takes a lot of coal. There's a lot of things involved in creating electric cars that don't necessarily make them a great alternative to save the planet. Number eight, all vaccines are wonderful and perfectly safe, and we should all have lots of them, at least daily if possible. Of course, we're finding out that's not true, and there's been a history stretching back 30, 40, 50, 60 years showing that no, some vaccines are good and some are bad. And as we move forward, a lot more of them tend to be bad. Number nine, the virus which caused COVID was invented in a lab in China and then spread around the globe to make money for Chinese companies producing masks and PCR tests. And of course, that's not true. There was a much larger agenda testing out how you can control society and how many people are prepared to be obedient. So to think that right now the standard conventional wisdom is that somehow the Chinese were gaining by this is just not true. Number 10, the World Health Organization is working to save the world from disease. And that brings up another interesting topic about people, they think charities are out there doing good when a lot of them are really just scams that make a handful of people that run these charities wealthy. And then the whole idea that the WHO, the World Health Organization, like so many other transnational organizations, is out there just trying to do good. Once again, it's all about power and wealth and transfer of money and power and wealth. And no, they're not necessarily out to do good. Number 11, the BBC is a news organization which can be trusted. And you can also talk about BBC and Facebook and Google and YouTube and Fox News and MSNBC. All of them. Uh, the idea that any one of them can be trusted, when we've been shown that they're all part of an agenda, and particularly in the United States, where we see high tech companies like Google and Amazon and even Microsoft that are active in propagating their own political agendas. And they have the power to control information, and they can label anything that challenges the status narrative and call it misinformation. And so the cognitive dissonance created for the masses is very palpable in our day and age. Number 12, our climate is changing rapidly. Within 5 years, the seas will have evaporated and the whole world will be ablaze. And of course, there's been a lot of people that have put forward that idea, but we've had these kind of fear tactics once again used for 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years. Back in the 70s, they were warning about a new ice age, and now we have global warming, and they found that label a little uncomfortable. So now it's climate change, and the fact is that just like the media, science has been co-opted, and the people who propagate the status narrative about climate change being an imminent disaster threatening all humanity, they're the ones that get the money for research. They're the ones that get to keep their jobs. They're the ones that get to keep publishing. They're the ones that keep uh, getting the research money at universities. And anyone that challenges the narrative gets ostracized, loses their money sources, and gets discredited. And it's just business. So the idea that any of these ideas that we hear about, you have to follow the money. And when you follow the money, you find out that a lot of organizations you might normally would think would be trustworthy aren't necessarily. Of course, number 13, a lot of people don't have a problem with this. Bankers are decent people who deserve every penny they are paid. And of course, that's conventional wisdom that a lot of people certainly don't necessarily believe in anymore. Number 14, NATO is helping to save us from World War III, and yet we find ourselves in a position where NATO seems to be promoting the world moving closer and closer to World War III. They're accepting the narrative that Russia attacked Ukraine unprovoked. They want to arm Ukraine to the teeth. There are a lot of countries like Scandinavia that used to be more neutral are now joining NATO, arming themselves to the teeth. And more of the moves that we see by NATO are provoking and antagonizing the situation more than helping the situation. Russia has every right to be concerned when more and more countries join NATO, and we have massive Western armament right on the Russian border. Number 15, the UN exists to bring peace and food to poor people in the world, and we're finding out more and more that the UN is more representative of transnational corporations and global corporate governance, and so the idea that they're bringing peace to the world and are there to feed poor people is just a mythology that gives people a lot of comfort. Number 16, anyone who drives a car or who eats food is a danger to the future of the world. So that's a nutty idea that people believe now. And the fact is that there are a lot of things that threaten the future of the world other than humans driving cars and eating meat, and these ideas put forth by the World Economic Foundation right now, that it just seems inevitable that ultimately the enemy would be us, would be humans themselves, and that's the point we've reached to now. So a lot of people in the past and a lot of pundits have understood the fact that the UN represents a lot of things um, that aren't good. And a good example of that is the fact that the main members can basically use the UN as just another power structure to propagate their own political agenda and their own military agendas around the globe because a handful of nations wield all the power in the UN. A good example of that is a lot of the condemnation of Israel for violating, perpetrating war crimes and violating Palestinian rights. And we can have 90% of the world be on board with that, and the UN, that portion of the UN being on board with that, and then we can have the United States basically uh, veto, have veto power over most of the world using the UN as a mechanism. And number 17, members of the royal family are just like us, except that they are very special and must be coddled, protected from reality, and treated like gods. That's a particular pet peeve of mine, the idea that there's still monarchies based on birthright um, is really absurd, especially going forward in the 21st century. It's a very romantic ideal that has a lot of appeal to people, but the fact that there's so much wealth amassed into a family with historical birthright, while a country, for example, like the UK, general population suffers while the royal family is coddled and get to live like gods. And in fact, I've done videos recently about the fact that the amount of money that the royal family has in Britain right now is outrageous, and yet they need more and just got a huge raise. Number 18, like I mentioned before, Israel is a very special country which must be allowed to do whatever it likes and given as much money as it wants. And I brought that up earlier, the fact that based on some sort of biblical claims, Israel is coddled by the United States and certain Western powers and perpetrate incredible atrocities and are now perpetrating genocide in Gaza in astonishing levels. And yet the conventional wisdom is that they should be allowed to do such. And granted, there's a lot of protests going on by certain demographics in the United States, and we have a large percentage of the world that objects and even want to charge Bibi Netanyahu with war crimes, justifiably so. But in conventional wisdom, Israel is the chosen country, it's the chosen people, and basically should be given free rein to do whatever they want because they are innocent victims of Muslim terrorism for 75 years. But once again, that's another story that's a little too big to get into right now. Number 20, the Bilderbergers and people who are members of the WEF make the best leaders, and we should do everything they tell us to do. And that's at the heart of this. We have talking about getting to the very heart of wealth and power in the world, and the meetings that the very richest and the elites have, the movers and shakers, the Bilderberg meetings and the Davos meetings, and the World Economic Foundation. They're laying out blueprints for the future of humanity, and there's no allegiance to any particular countries. It's a transnational movement, and their allegiance is to wealth and power. And so for them to be mandating ideas about how every individual person in this world should live now and will live in the future is something we should be very uncomfortable with. But once again, in conventional wisdom, and people who think that everything in the world is normal and is working the way it should be with a few anomalies, they will accept this idea. And then another idea that is becoming acceptable again for the first time since the 30s is that euthanasia is a great way to help people who are suffering from physical or mental pain and who are poor. And we're finding more and more that organizations like the WEF and the Bill Gates Foundation and countries like Canada are now embracing euthanasia as a legitimate part of medical service to people. And once again, that's it's send chills up people's spines. So anyway, an interesting list. I thought it was fairly interesting, and but the core of the discussion that appeals to me is the fact that, like I said at the beginning of the video, it's just really fascinating to see how many people around you and people you have discussions with who think that basically everything in the world is working well. It just needs a little bit of tweaking, that everything in the world is more or less normal, just needs a little bit of tweaking, and that the narrative out there coming from the government and these organizations for the elites, all this stuff is true, and that they're benevolent. And how could it be otherwise? To believe anything else would be a conspiracy theory. It would make you kind of nutty. And so people that don't do research, don't do analysis, don't have any critical thinking, and look around the world and think it more or less is what they say it is, are severely misinformed, delusional. And I used to be a little more angry about that sort of thing, but I realize there's a lot of powerful forces, a lot of money, a lot of great minds that operate behind the scenes to basically manipulate people from 24/7, from the day they're born till the day they die. And so it's not really their fault. It's just a sad reality. But the bottom line, I guess, is that the people who believe conspiracy theories are the ones that have analytical abilities, critical thinking, have the will and the time to do research, and find out that things aren't what they are supposed to be, or what they say they are. And then we have the people who uh, are not doing the research, don't have critical thinking, don't have analysis, and are just passive, absorbing what they're being told. And that's certainly true, and exponentially more true as we move forward. I'm a useful idiot. Don't you be one too.